By the way, it's kind of hard to follow that. That was pretty amazing. But we're gonna, we're gonna have a real conversation up here. Um, so actually, we got introduced, but you guys want to introduce yourselves, talk a little bit about yourselves before we get going?
To the lady first.
Okay, hi everybody. My name is Andrea Aquaye. I'm the VP for the coffee category at the Coca-Cola company. I'm originally from the African continent, in many places in Africa, so South Africa as well as Ghana, and Latin America. So my mom's Brazilian. So
From
I'm
where? Brazil?
yeah, Brazil,
Oh, me
Fortaleza.
too.
Yes. Yeah, multicultural is in my blood.
What about you, Mr. Albert?
Yes, thank you. Great to be here. So, Albert Thompson, I'm the managing director of digital innovation at Walton Isaacson. We are by trade a culture first agency. So, culture is in the blood in the sense that we face the world the way it faces us, and we help clients better face a diverse community of customers that they're pursuing.
Love it. Well, I think at this point it's pretty clear that diverse audiences should be an essential part of any brand's growth strategy, right? We know that this audience are early adapters, they're younger, they basically shape culture, right? But they have a tremendous spending power. So hopefully today what we're going to talk about is how brands can actually harness the power of diverse communities to unlock that growth, but also discuss how do we overcome those obstacles that have made it not an easy ease of adoption, right? So before we get going, let's level set. I think the last 5 years have changed the conversation. So many are jumping in, right? We were multicultural, now we're diverse. There's the rise of DEI for some and the decline of DEI for others. But the truth is that it's very confusing for some brands, if you want it to be, let's be clear. But let's level set. When we talk about diverse marketing, what does it mean to your brands?
Look, I think we're in an era where no one makes money off the original consumer that built the business because some of these companies are 25, 50, 100 years old. So that consumer is no longer with us, right? Okay. So when you start to look at who's in your backyard, in most major metropolitan areas where most brands make revenue, in particular Coca-Cola as a bottling company, there are diverse communities that make up the populace of in-market opportunity. And companies need to acknowledge that it's a very different configuration today, whether you want to accept that or acknowledge it at all. And I think there are certain categories, in particular media advertising, that are kind of sometimes ignorant to that notion. And I always tell people, marketing is the parent company. And marketing is about understanding supply chain. And supply chain is all about distributing into communities where there's opportunity. And I think the first beginning portion of level setting the conversation is everyone needs to understand those are the business principles for building operations. And if it's in diverse communities, that it is essentially what it is. And I think that's what people need to reflect in terms of thinking about how brands need to show up.
Thank you. So from my perspective, diversity is at the core of what we do in marketing because at the end of the day, it's really about engaging emotionally and functionally with consumers. And if you want to grow, you want your pool to be as large as possible. And therefore, the lens has to be that I need to understand whatever target I'm going after in a deep enough way such that I can attract them. And if you look at the way in which our brands are now so much more global, you have to bring a diverse or multicultural lens to it. You've also got to bring a professionally diverse lens to marketing. And what I mean by that is we need people that understand tech. We need people that understand data. We need people that understand humans and ideas. So it is marketing today is so much more complex than it was before, where you could do one ad and just show it to everybody. You now have to really understand who you're going for and how you're really going to connect.
Yeah, the one thing I wanted to build on that as well is the American model has always been about overabundance versus the European model is about scarcity. So in America, the belief is everyone should have accessibility to a Coca-Cola, a homeless person on the street to a billionaire. When you think about operating a model for which there is to be universal accessibility, then that means a universal playbook that is about inclusivity to everyone, because that's the idea of a ubiquitous nature of a product being available to anyone. It's why it's sold at a gas station, a 7-Eleven, a grocery store, a big box. It's at a bar, it's at every restaurant, it's at certain QSRs. So you have to understand, like, you all know that inherently you are in front of everyone all the time. So you have to be ready for every identity that could show up all the time, anywhere, to help co-create and co-build the business. And it's probably, I would assume, has led to such a proliferation of an expansion of all your flavors now. You know, you go into certain kiosks, you hit the machine, it's like, oh my God, there's 100 flavors of Coca-Cola now. I remember when there was 2. Or there was New Coke, oh my God, that was like an era. Yeah. And then you guys are acquiring, that has to come from the understanding of the consumer populace that is now coming downstream, that now requires you to identify at the product development level that we have a series of new personas and constituencies to now be accountable for, but we want to take ownership for, and that's very powerful.
Exactly, yeah.
And I love that because you're basically, in the most simplest of terms, you're just reaching everybody, right? That's the goal. But at the same time, we got to understand that there are nuances within those everybody, right? And we got to understand how to appropriately reach and engage with that. So I'm assuming, yes, top level, we're now including everybody, but there needs to be a personalized communication and strategy for all of us. All right, so I am of the school of thought, and I apologize, but I am of the school of thought that we've had this conversation. I mean, yes, last 5 years have been changing, but most of us have been at this conversation for decades. It's the reality. We can name call it so many things, but it's been decades. So I hate the argument that we need to educate the market. That's here nor there. That time has passed. But I do think there is something to making a critical issue within brands. We keep on seeing the same 5 brands step up. That's it. How do we make it a critical issue? What is that mindset? Because it's not education. So what is that mindset that needs to shift to make diversity a critical issue for the other, I don't know, 500 brands that need to be in the space?
It's simple. It's really about making sure that people understand that the business of inclusivity, because there's diversity and there's inclusivity. There's an expression that I really like. Diversity is having different people in the room. Inclusivity is being invited to dance.
Yes.
And so we need to invite different people to dance with us. I saw a speech yesterday about people with handicap and how do we bring them into the conversation and make them part of the way in which we recruit consumers. So it's not okay, now I'm going to do something that is diverse, but really about making it part. And I think for me, the main thing is just making sure that you got the right people in the room making the decisions. And that generally takes time.
And I would add to that attitude reflects leadership still. So with Coca-Cola having a decent base out of Atlanta, Georgia, one of the historically black cities, that was one of the corporations that did a more effective job of having minority, in particular black executives, the attitude of the corporation is very much like, we will not forsake these audiences because the people who are part of the decisioning at the highest level reflect the community that we need to pursue. Then that leads to PRing that for the sake of corporate social responsibility. and holding themselves accountable to the marketplace and the consumer they're pursuing. There are just very few brands that do that and continue to do that at a high rate of speed. That has everything to do with the attitude that shows up in market, which, as you said, it being invited to dance, which means being invited to the formulation of new product design, new product innovation that carries all the way through supply chain execution to even choosing supply partners and retail partners who can put on and reflect the same face. And I think that is very powerful to make that acknowledgement at the decisioning level that most organizations just are disinterested in doing so.
Yes.
Did I say the quiet part out loud?
I am sitting here. I am sitting here being like Albert for president, but But let's talk now a little bit more brand specific. How have you been working within your organizations to bring this to life, right? What successes have you had that changed the conversation internally to be like, yeah, it's not just good to do. This really does drive growth of the brand.
I would love to use the example of my previous role in South Africa. I used to work for a beer company, and as you know, a beer company is a very male-oriented. And I think what really one of the things that changed the conversation is there was policy. There is policy driven by government to say you need to have a representative workforce. You need a workforce that represents the market. And so there was that policy, but that policy is not enough. You've really got to be able to show that the business of diversity is actually profitable. And so in South Africa, where 80% of the population is Black, if you want to market to Black consumers, you've got to really understand them. It's not just about putting a figurehead or putting somebody there. It's really about understanding the culture and understanding the nuances so that you can portray that. So if you are able to do that and connect better, you make more money. So it's, at the end of the day, why do we work for, these big corporations? It is about, growing shareholder profit. It's about, better world and all of that. So I think in my experience, in my previous experience, that was the thing that really shifted, was the belief that by doing that, the business would grow.
By the way, how amazing is it to have policy for inclusivity? Just a moment of reflection right there in Juneteenth to have such a policy.
Yeah, I mean, that's huge when you talk about policy in governance, because look, if you tell the average brand how to win in culture, they're disinterested. If you tell them they're failing, they're like, oh snap, we have to get it together. Policy says that losing is not an option, or there will be substantial consequences at a much higher level. And it also means if you don't hear the policy, you never should have been invited in the building in the first place, then represent us as a business corporation. We meet clients all over the spectrum. I think inherently what they understand is to be hyper competitive, to survive, their contribution mix is so much more diverse. They now need that to maintain the same level of profitability, make the same money they've always been making. And since no company is not in growth mode, a company's either in growth mode or they just filed bankruptcy. Like there's kind of no middle ground. So everyone's always searching for new money. And now the new money is mapped on culture, which means they have to live in culture to define it, discovering it. Because the new baseline that built them has eroded. So they have to replenish the pipeline, as I say, largely with a diverse community of people to do so. I think, as you said, a lot of people haven't gotten into the inclusivity conversation yet, bringing them to the dance. They just want people in the room, and it'll take conjecture, but it's not enough when you're talking about building margins for a business. It allows you to create colorful TV spots and run some social media ads and hire some influencers of color. But when people talk about bottom line impact, they're starting to recognize they have to give them a seat at the table to help mold and shapeshift what they are putting in market, because it's just not good enough. And the younger generation plays by a new set of rules. They could care less about the legacy. They're very much into the now. And to a degree, do you have the adaptability to transcend with us? And that is something that's very foreign to a lot of corporations right now, because they've never seen that modeling mix before.
So that's been successful for you in-house to bring in and be able to showcase the growth that way.
Exactly, because I think the biggest problem is the average marketer hasn't looked the consumer in the eye in so long, and now they're stuck in meetings and they're worried about what's being shared in the boardroom instead of getting out on the street and meeting them personally and understanding what the ask. Consumers are always signaling, and clearly they were saying, our Coke products are not sweet enough. We need cream soda. We need vanilla. We need all these, all these flavors like it's a barista. So the model has shape-shifted, but it gives Coca-Cola credit for being more of a listening brand and understanding what they're teaching them, because that other competitor with the blue and red may decide, well, we'll just jump the shark and do the formula if you don't want to do it. So that competitive spirit, that rivalry, helps also accelerate this ethos of we need to stay at the forefront of what they are telling us before the next brand creates something that we can't compete with.
So it's basically, if you don't do it, what's the opportunity that's lost?
And I think, I mean, just to add another angle to it, even from a recruiting of a Gen Z perspective, you know, that's also diversity, because in a lot of the corporates, you'll have more millennials, Gen X's. And so, you know, we want to recruit Gen Zs. So you've got to be able to bring them into the conversation and really understand what it is that they want. You know, at the core of marketing is empathy. And a lot of us get into the business because we love that. You know, I love consumers. I love to understand what it is that they want.
And there's a lot of nuances in that audience itself. People like to use the generalization of Gen Z and millennials, and it's like, there's still diversity within that, and we need to understand it. So let's take a step a little bit back and talk about, specifically with diverse media, diverse creators, everything in the ecosystem of media. As much as brands have wanted to leap forward, I hate the word testing because that audience is there. We're not testing the audience. We're testing how accurately you're engaging with the audience. So, but those brands that are, you know, trying to understand how to connect with the market, we've seen that there are obstacles that prevent them from doing so. So let's talk a little bit about what those are and how your brands have been able to create a roadmap for success overcoming them.
I mean, for me, the first thing is making sure that you've got the right team. And when I say the right team, I'm talking about the right agencies, the right production house, the right, you know, so it has to be reflective of a much more diverse universe in all senses, in cultural, in culture, but also in terms of skill set. Because at the end of the day, doing a TV ad is just not, it's just not the only thing that we want to do. So in my experience, just making sure that they're the right people working on your business, bringing you the right ideas or these new ideas coming from different places, really starts with a really fertile ground from which to build on. And then obviously making sure that as you execute it, you're also making sure that the right people are there to execute it, because an idea can be lost in execution.
Yeah, and the thing I would build from that is, look, the war is for attention. That's whatever. That's the currency people want, is attention. Coca-Cola just wants more attention than the other logo. I mean, theoretically, but the attention is very much related to inflow of the brand, because with attention comes influence, influence comes power and the ability to transact. There are media types that garner better attention related to a brand in a given category than others. So what is in someone else's playbook doesn't mean that should be your playbook, just because that is where much of the media hype is and currency is to spend, because everybody's doing it. And I think that when you start to sort of break that down, then you have to look at, well, let's look at the subcultures of attention, because we've talked about that with the Latino community, with the amount of countries of origin, and then breaking down Mexico. The configuration of attention varies based on the series of subcultures. There are obviously tactics like the creator community that has the ability to relate to each individual subculture and garner the attention respective for a given brand. And then there are certain media types that have or are part of the attention stack a little bit more holistically. But I think the beauty of working with partners who represent the culture, speak to the culture, They understand the attention formula related to that consumer you are pursuing than someone mainstream who says they get everyone. Reach is not a metric for Coca-Cola to make revenue. That's a nice to have. Brands want high intent audiences who are going to spend the money over and over again. The whole idea of media is to demonstrate their ability to connect those audiences so that they can continue to have business impact and get the necessary return. And all of that is not necessarily created equal. People are just doing what's most popular and they're doing what they did yesterday. Instead of breaking down who has built pipes around attention and targeting to speak to a constituency of consumers who are going to connect to move this forward. Because when you get into a boardroom, you ain't talking about media metrics and vanity metrics and clicks and viewer completion rates. You're talking about how much did we ship? What was the volume moving out of all the respective stores? What is the replenishment rate? What is the next distribution deal we need to cut? And how are we going to expand into new markets to sell more product? None of which has anything to do with media. So media needs to map on top of supply chain footprint. So if you're in international markets or in LATAM, you want to work with a media partner who understands that and can map the opportunity on top of your distribution points of interest to make money. And that's what most media companies don't do. They don't pull through consumer intelligence by category, so they can't tell you what to buy best for your brands. They can just tell you everyone drinks a Coca-Cola on our platform. Okay. And then they can't necessarily ensure that media maps to the speed in which your product is moving in and out of off shelves and to people's homes. That is the ambition of marketing. And that's why I always say marketing is the parent company, not media. Media advertising is underneath. They've got the formula wrong that in the physical world, brands know very well, but in the media world, they don't understand the value chain. The two aren't speaking, and that's the disconnect.
A lot to unpack there, a lot. But I did like the comment you just made about the focus of working with your diverse partners to really understand the audience. Because the truth is that not all the data is there. As much as we live in a world of data, as a, from our perspective in media, diverse data is not 100% there. It just is not. So you have to work directly with your vendors and your partners to actually, it's like a revision of, it's reanalyzing the data to map it back to diverse consumers. So I love that. I really, really do. Okay.
I also really like that because there's data and then there's insight.
Yes.
Absolutely.
And
that's where you do need the human perspective to be able to get to a really great insight. So I agree.
Well, even better, how many times has an agency or media entity gave you information that has no meaning for you? Because you know the next meeting you're walking into, the information isn't useful. Sometimes what is useful is more valuable than what is true. It's true the click rate was 0.5%. And you're like, yeah, but that's not meaningful nor useful. And let of anything to secure the next deal we're going to cut, and definitely not my job. Yeah. So why don't you give me outcomes information that is usable so I can invest more into what you do and put more money into the marketplace. Brands are constantly trying to find ways to put more money into the marketplace. A lot of media entities are poorly organizing that so they don't put in.
I'm laughing because I could just imagine an Albert brief when you get it at your desk and trying to unpack all the useful information that will be there.
It's why you guys have been rocking with me for 6 years now. You listen to the brief?
Yes.
I mean,
yes.
That is the hard work. It's much harder to write a 1-page brief than it is to write a 20-page brief.
Absolutely. And we thank you for the ones that do. Please. So let's fast forward to the most talked about subject this week, which is AI. I mean, we're not over it, but we're over it. No, I'm kidding. But everybody's been using AI. It doesn't matter where you stand on it. There is a use for it, right? However, what we're not really talking about is the impact that it has on the progress that we've made for the diverse ecosystem, right? Every tech change we've seen has had an impact because we have not been in the boardroom. We have not been there discussing. There's a lack of diverse engineers. There's so many gaps, right? So we get the tech with the rest of the marketplace and we're trying to catch up. We're playing catch up consistently. So AI is a new wave, comes new problems. So have we learned something and are we ahead of it? Or are we in a conversation of red alert, these are the things we should be looking out for?
Yeah, I think it's AI is definitely something that we have to embrace. I think it's a really, really powerful tool. And the best way to do it is to accept it. I had a boss that used to say, make whatever your friend. So make AI your friend. And
My
I
mom
think,
used to say that.
and I think it's incumbent on all of us to really, really, learn about AI, learn how to use it, and before kind of rejecting it, because the more you reject it, the more you will be left behind. And yes, there are some challenges around it, and we all know those challenges. But I think there's huge opportunity, and it's something that we should all be excited about. And I think, especially for some of the different diverse cultures that are about creating culture and can shape culture, I think it's a tool that could really amplify what it is that we stand for. And I think it's we need to lean into it, for a lack of a better word.
My mom would say, give it a pretty name, make it your best friend, move on.
I couldn't agree more. I mean, I think it's always funny because a lot of the advancement in technology is secondhand military technology. The internet was, Web3, the blockchain is, computer vision, CCTV. It's here to stay once they commercialize it for us to play with. I think what people need to look at is the entire value chain of marketing and understand how AI can optimize all the inputs. So AI tools creatively, like Adventure, they can optimize creative iterations dynamically while campaigns are running. Companies like Lumen explain they can optimize supply path. So, because we don't have line of sight and the SSPs don't teach us anything. To the idea that Coca-Cola could use it to come up with new flavors or new names of flavors if you want to go the Ben and Jerry's route. And maybe you do that globally because you can pull cultural cues in ways that you would guess, but AI will say, no, that's it. To the idea that it will optimize manufacturing. From a media perspective, code on page starts to tell you, these are the pages where this particular brand can get the most traction because consumers can consume this content, and that's mapped back to a persona model related to the brand. So each facet of what we do will have some sort of machine input to collapse with 100 people worth of resourcing couldn't even accomplish, and we don't have budgets to hire that anyway. We're even looking at it on the influencer side between what influencers' followers can drive more business impact. So brands like Coca-Cola don't pick the favorites they want to be on the red carpet with. They pick the ones that are going to make them more money because you're in business to make money. Like, that's the idea when people start looking at machines. The biggest deficit that I've seen in AI, the large language models are not mapped on culture. So they don't understand like black culture because the sourcing of data isn't. They're not sourced on Latino culture, or relatively poorly. Definitely not queer, and I don't know about Asian. And then for someone that has mixed race roots as yourself, definitely not. It's not even ready for that. So we have to still acknowledge the limitations of the machine, and as you said, requires human input and human element to close the gap, synthesize, make meaning of it so we don't make major mistakes in market. Right now, AI is making small bets, fine-tuning a few things to see if those become bigger things, and then rolling up the sum of its parts. So there's a potential amount of promise, and there are players literally in every derivative of the marketing ecosystem. It's just a lot of the flirtation with the tech is happening below the line. Nobody's talking, but it's taking place. I think at the end of the day, people need to be curious enough about what AI can do, because the promise of AI was to program childlike curiosity. So don't let a machine that acts like one of your young children out-program you when you should have just been as intellectually curious as a 3-year-old and 4-year-old, touching everything and making meaning of it. And I think that's how we need to approach it in the marketplace. And then it could be weaponized intelligence for Coca-Cola to beat that other logo.
I actually also think with what you're saying, it kind of can empower diverse audiences, because if we know that we are the cultural change. We are the early adapters. We're the ones spending across different categories. We know that. But if now manufacturing's tied to it, that gives the power back to the ones that are actually driving all the actual conversions, right? Like the ones that are actually, so I actually think it'll highlight that the diverse communities are the ones that are driving those purchases. So there's a potential there. But I think there's, like you said, there's a lot of risk with it. We just need to embrace it. From the creative side, I do think there's a couple more red flags that we need to address. Obviously, like you said, it's about the consumer, right? Consumer first. We can't use AI to fix lack of diversity in messaging. Like that we understand, that's a red flag. We need to like have more, to your point earlier, maybe policy around that would prevent that from really happening.
Yeah, because AI is not going to allow you to cheat culture codes. It can maybe accelerate your understanding, put pieces together, but you don't not have to understand culture because you have Latimer, Perplexity, ChatGPT sitting in front of you. The machines are only as good as the people programming it. If the people suck, the machine will kind of suck. And I think people have to acknowledge its limitation in the early going, so we keep the hands-on keys. So I think people think, oh, I don't have to deal with diverse media partners. I don't have to hire a multicultural agency. We have a machine that can figure out that. No, I've queried it against my own quarter-century knowledge in culture and digital. It's relatively ignorant in many facets, especially once you get into verticalization or specialization. So we still have to be, cognizant of it, as they say, early days, for those with the British accent, and then start to think about what is the continuum for which we'll get there, but make sure we are part of its development process so that it has an accurate representation and portrayal of who we are.
I think what you said matters, that we all have to be testing it and playing with it. Actually, fun fact, if you actually put top Hispanic sites on ChatGPT, Univision doesn't even come up. How does that happen? I mean, we all know what it is. Like, how does that even happen? So we also have to be understanding it ourselves and how to leverage it. Well, we're out of time, but thank you so much. This was insightful. I learned a thing or two. But happy Juneteenth.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
And happy
Happy
Juneteenth.
Juneteenth.
Thank you.
All right, thank you.